All right, today's video is about the wall hack system. You might have played a box fight or something with superpowers where they used wall hacks where you can see other players through the walls. Today, we're going to show you how to get that all set up, including how to create the outline in Photopea, how to bring that into UEFN, how to create the material, the Niagara, and the verse setup. But before I get into that, let me show you everything working. So I have it set up where I have a specific class. That class will get a remote signal or could use a trigger or a button, but they still need to be on the right class. When they hit that, the player will show up through walls and the VFX will follow them everywhere they go. But it doesn't happen to me and it won't happen to my team when I enable it. So I'm going to show you how to get all of that set up. Okay, so we need to make the outline and I use Photopea to do that. So let's get that up. We're going to create a new project. I'm going to use the Twitter profile. It doesn't really matter. I just like to use one that's a little bit smaller and that is square. And we're going to set that to use a transparent background. Let's call this wall hack image. And we need to create a rectangle in here. That's what this one does here. So left click that, draw a rectangle. That's going to come out black at first. We're going to come up to fill, change that to none. So it basically will be transparent. Off to the right click on background, go to blending options, go to outer glow, click on it. It should select it, should show these options here. We want blend mode to be normal, opacity to be 100%. Click the yellow here and change that to the color that we want. Normally go with red. Adjust spread and size to get what you want. So spread will make it a more solid on the outside, and size controls how far out it goes. So adjust that as you want. Click OK, click File, Export as PNG. This should default to the name that we gave the project with the sizes. If you hit save, this will save to your downloads folder. So now that we have that saved, let's open up UEFN and we can just drag that in. And I already had one called that, so it basically overrode it. Wonder if Control Z will undo that. No, doesn't matter. So that's how to create the outline and import that texture, the image, into UEFN using Photopea. All right, next we need the material. I've already got mine created, but I'll show you how that's all set up. Um, First, make sure you're on this node here, which is the only thing that's here when you create a new one. I'm going to set this to show only modified properties so you can see only the things that matter. Make sure the blend mode is translucent, shading model is unlit. Disable depth test is really important. That's actually what's going to allow it to show through walls. And then make sure the necessary Niagara and sprites stuff is enabled. For any of these other things, if you right click, you can find them in the list. So particle color, multiply is in the list. Make sure it's set up just like this, with the alpha going to opacity, the RGBA going to emissive color. Just make sure all the lines are sort of connected like you see here. This is a constant. So if we right click and look for constant, that's what this is. And this number actually controls how big this outline will be around the player. I have found that 250 is generally a good number. But if it feels too small or too big around your player, then adjust that number. If you go uh, up with the number, like 300, 350, then the outline will be bigger around the player. If you go lower, then the outline will be smaller around the player. And that is how to set up the material for this. Next is the Niagara. So let's close this. Um, I'll hit save. I think it might have gotten modified when we actually brought in our new texture since we overwrote the one we had. I'm going to create a new Niagara so you can see what all those options look like. Right click in a blank space down here, go to Niagara, choose the single loop particle and create. We'll call this new wall hack and double click on that. Click this top section and change that to your wall hack material and save. Now let's go set this on our VFX spawners, which I already have selected here. It's actually something else we're going to have to change with our Niagara, but I want to show you why before I go and change them. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to push changes and I will come back when those changes are pushed so I can show you what the problem is and how to fix it. I'll be back after that's done. All right, those changes have pushed. Let's start the game and see what works and what doesn't work. So here I am. I'm gonna go get my class 16 setup. Now, so I hit the button, I can see it, but it's just not always there. Um, See how it like kind of disappears. So I'll show you how to fix that. So let's end the game. Let's get back into UEFN. This is really simple, but it took me a really long time to figure out. So if we open up the Niagara, click on it, go to fixed bounds and make the minimum much smaller. So I'm going to add a couple of zeros here. Do that across the board. And then the same with the max. We want the max to be a lot bigger. Finally. So save that, close it, and push our changes. And I'll come back when that's done and show you, hopefully, that that problem is fixed. All right, we're back. The game is live again, so let's start and see if our visibility of that is fixed. Get back on the right class, and sure enough, we don't have any of that glitchy stuff going on. It shows everywhere that we want it to. So that is how your Niagara needs to be configured to make this work. Next up, we have a bunch of VFX spawners. I'm going to show you how those are set up now. Basically have a set for team one, a set for team two. If you had more teams, you'd do another set for those. Basically, you need to have one VFX spawner per player in the game for each team. So if there's going to be two teams and each team will have one player, that's two players. So two of those for team one and then two more for team two. And the reason we're doing that is basically if we look at just the configured stuff here, we have custom visual effect override set for the new wall hack, enabled on phase none and visible to team index one. So we need a set that's visible to team one, a set that's visible to team two, and if you had more teams, you would need a set visible for those as well. And that's going to get bound to each player and then visible to the class in question. And that should be it. So basically, one VFX per player in the game times the number of teams. And that should have your VFX spawner devices set the way you need them to be. Next, I'll show you the class stuff. So we have a class, where to go? Class designer. Oh, it's doing that thing where you can't see it. Whatever, doesn't matter. Not a lot to see here. We are setting the class number to 16. You can use whatever class number you want, but make sure your VFX spawners and other related items are all set with the appropriate class. And then we are issuing uh, a remote, a signal remote. I'm using the uncommon. It doesn't really matter, except that it needs to match the signal remote that you have set up here. So that's how the class designer is set up. And then the class selector is just configured for the class number in question. You may have this set up differently depending on how you're assigning people to classes, but that's how I'm doing it in the tutorial. Next, we're going to show the remote signal. So I showed you on the teams, let's see, let me click that. I mean the class designer, how we're giving out a signal remote. That will pair up um, to our signal remote manager, and that defaults to uncommon. If you change this, you need to make sure that your class or however you're giving that out, that is adjusted if you want to use the remote to do it. Now, with this tutorial and the code that I'm going to give you, you can also use a button or a trigger. Um, but if you use the signal remote, this is how I have it configured. All right, next up, I will show you both the button and the trigger. There's really not much to see there. I don't know. I don't think I configured anything on them at all. Yep, there's nothing configured there, nothing configured there. So those are being used in their vanilla state. And then they will get bound, all of that will get bound to the creative device, which I'll show you next. All right, so we need to have one creative device per team. Each creative device is going to have all of your spawn pads configured. So if you've got two, then you'll have two array elements. If you've got 10 spawners, you'll have 10. Um, even though this is for team one, we're actually going to have all the spawn pads in the game assigned here. The VFX remote signal should only need one of those, and both creative devices will have the same thing. Enabled by trigger, again, just need the one trigger and the button, unless you have, unless different teams will use different triggers or different buttons. But with the way I built this, we're just using one trigger, one button, shared between all the teams. And then the wall hack VFX. That's the only thing on these two devices that will be different. Um, the one that you name Team 1 will use the VFX spawners that we have named Team 1 and previously set to be visible by Team 1. I have this configured so we can do an infinite duration or we can do it based on time. Now I know the VFX spawner can be set up for time, but I'm actually controlling how long it shows in verse to give you more flexibility. So if we go look at the other creative device, the only thing that should be different is the wall hack VFX. One's using team one ones, one's using team two. These are using the same verse code. There isn't two different verse scripts for this, two devices using the same script. And I will show you that next. All right, for the verse script, I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly. The code will be available in a link in the description. Some of this, like this here, I actually didn't write any of this. That is pulled from an Epic Games resource. The stack allows us to take VFX and assign them as players come in. And then if players leave, we can actually return those VFX back to a pool so that future players can get those. If we don't use a mechanism like this, it's a little bit harder to make sure that um, when players come and go, that the VFX that they had assigned is available for future players. So I'm using that to control that. So these are editables so that you can control how long the VFX will show and the different devices, things like that. The VFX stack is actually using this mechanism here. Basically, all of the VFXs will get put into the stack and then will get pulled out as needed or popped out as needed. When someone leaves, it'll get pushed back into the stack for someone else to use. So on begin is going to initialize our spawn pads to subscribe to spawn events. We're going to create our stack so that all the VFXs are available. We're going to subscribe to players being removed so that we can make sure the VFX they had is disabled. You don't want a weird outline somewhere where a player left. And then we're going to monitor the remote signal, the trigger, and the button so that we know when to enable that stuff. So when a player spawns, we're going to check if they've already been initialized. If they have, we're not going to do anything. They already have a VFX following them around. So we don't need to worry about that. If they are new, then we are going to issue them a VFX. That's what this code here is doing. We're pulling an item out of the stack and issuing that to the player and then monitoring that through a map. This function here is what's going to make the VFX spawner actually sort of stick to the player as they move around. It will be off in its default state, and then only the qualified players will be able to turn that on. When a player leaves, we're basically going to pull them out of the map so we don't have players in the map who don't exist anymore, and we're going to disable their VFX. Again, that's so that you don't have a random outline where a player used to be. This is where we're monitoring our button presses for the remote signal, our button press for the button device, and the trigger. If those get hit, then it will enable the VFX for pretty much everyone who isn't the person who triggered it and the other team. So nobody on your team should have the outline around it. That's pretty much what this logic is doing here. It's checking to make sure that the person who pushed the button isn't it. It's checking to see that the person who we're trying to assign or trying to turn the VFX on for isn't on our team. This is the code that's actually making the VFX sort of follow the player around. It's just going to teleport to the player pretty much every frame. When a player hits one of the buttons, so one of these, it's going to use this to enable the VFX. And uh, if we have turned infinite duration off, then we're going to use time to determine when to um, turn the VFX back off again. And this is how we're determining whether or not people are on the initiators team. So that's pretty much the whole verse code. You can copy that down if you want to, but I'm going to try to remember to put a link in the description below so you can have easy access to that. All right. And I think the last part of this is just going to be showing each piece of that in action. So here we are back in the game. Let's get it started. So we need to make sure we're on the right class. And then we've already seen the button. So we know that the remote button has that effect. Let's stop it and start it again. And I'll show you the button device next. Again, we need to be on the right class so we can see it. So I'm now on the right class. Go and push the button. We can see that we have that effect. So this gives you a few different ways of turning this on. And then I will show you the trigger. On the right class, trigger, and there it is. So a few different ways to turn that on. And that should wrap up our session for today. There's some other stuff over here, but none of that is relevant to what we're doing right now. I've used this project for some other stuff, so that should be it for today. If you have found this tutorial useful, please be sure to like and subscribe and share with other people that might find it interesting as well. I appreciate it. Thanks.